Hello everyone, welcome to EDUeki Learning channel. Today I am covering about Python data types and variables. These are building blocks of Python. Once you understand these basics, learning advanced Python becomes much easier. Every Python program, whether it is AI, DevOps automation, cloud automation, or a web development, it all starts with these fundamentals. Without further delay, let's get into the course tracker. This is the course tracker that you will be following to understand the topics that I am covering on each session and the corresponding links for the video. Also, if you have noticed, there is a resources tab here which has some additional external resources links that will definitely help you to enhance your learning skills and the capabilities. As we started off writing the code from today, and I'm going to commit these code changes to my GitHub repository that you can use for clone and do some practice from your end. If you have any specific questions on it, please fill the questions in the question tracker sheet that you are finding it in the description of this video. Alright, in the last lecture we have talked about the importance of the data types and the HTTP request methods, and today let's start with these data types. And there are primitive data types that we can talk about in Python, which are integer, floating, string, boolean, and bytes. Let's start one by one, and let me use the PyCharm ID key to get started with writing our first program. As you know, PyCharm is the ID that I am preferring throughout this entire series, and here I have opened the project already and I'm just creating a new file to get started with writing the simple program. Any data that the Python is going to handle, the data has to be get stored into the memory that it can use later throughout the program whenever it has to do some operations. The data can be stored into the real memory using a variable. Let's say my Python program wanted to use a number 10 in order to do some math operations. The number 10 has to be get stored into the real memory using a variable. Here the left side A is called as a variable, equal to is the sign for assignment, and 10 is the literal value of type integer. When we execute this code, the literal 10 integer will be get stored into the A variable. Is mean that in the backend when the program runs, the 10 value will be get stored into the real memory to the specific address location with the A as a reference variable, so that rest of the program whenever we need this 10 value for any business related use cases, then it will be using by referencing to this A variable. The variable name can be a snake case format, in the sense the variables should not be get started with a numericals. The variables should not be having a hyphen, right? The variables should always start with a lowercase alphabets followed by any number of sequences, and of course it has some limitations on the number of characters that you can use within the variable name, but it should be some meaningful name so that it's easy to understand the purpose of the value that you are going to store into this variable. So later down the line, after 6 months, you come back and refer your code. It's easy to understand the purpose of defining these variables if we have meaningful names for it. The snake case format is explaining that whenever to have a meaningful variable name, if you think that the two wording would be more sufficient, right? Let's say I wanted to have some phone number has to be stored into a variable, then probably I wanted to keep my variable name as phone number, right? But it would be nice to have a underscore right between these two words for easy readability. So this is called as an snake case format. Well, all right. If it is a phone number, right, usually this phone number will not be used for any mathematical sum or subtraction related operations, correct? The phone number is kind of a number that we use for any other dealing purposes, but in general in a application related stuff we are going to store this phone number as is in some way databases, correct? I mean, based on the use cases, the data type that we are going to refer should be accurate, right? If the number is being used for any mathematical purposes, it makes sense to store that as an integer value. If it is not for mathematical operations, then probably the data should be stored as or processed as a string, right? So that means if you have a data that is not for mathematical operations, then that data can be within the quote mark. So this data will be treated as like a string data. The string data, any data that is enclosed by the quotes called as an referred as an string data. The within the quote mark, it could be a number, it could be a, let's say, first name is equal to Rav123, right? So any any alpha numerical combination is also fine, right, as long as the data is enclosed within the quote mark that is treated as a string. The string data is not applicable for any mathematical operations. In this case, though the phone number look like a number, but still I can't use this directly for any math related calculations, right? If you think that your use case has any math related use cases, then the data should be like an integer. For example, I'm just having one more variable here called my number, and I'm going to store the number 10. Here the number 10 is called as a literal integer, which we can use for any mathematical related operations, right? So same thing, like I would say my number 2 is equal to, let's say, 14.5. The 14.5 is called as a floating number, right, which again can be used for mathematical related operations, right? So I have talked about the integer type of data, floating data, and the string data, right? Any data type that you are storing into a variable, right, in the backend, when you execute this code, it is going to assign a memory location from your real memory and store this data referencing to this variable, and we can use that variable name to access that data for your rest of the program to achieve your specific business use cases. And there is one more primitive data type called Boolean. Let's say I have a variable called accepted, right, ACCEPTED, and the value of this variable, let's say I'm keeping it as true. T is an uppercase, right? And sometimes the value of this accepted variable can be a false. The value true or a false is referred as a Boolean type of data, and mostly this Boolean data will be used whenever we wanted to know is it accepted or not, is it true or not, is it false, some a decision making kind of related things. And there is one more primitive data type called bytes. Let's say I have a variable called username, right, and my username is Rav1234, and usually the data which is enclosed by the quote mark is treated as a string, but if the string is starts with B like this, then this data is referred as a bytes format. What difference? Right, here the first name and the username both looks kind of the strings only, which has alpha numerical data, enclosed by the quote mark, but whenever you use B is mean that this data referred as a bytes format. For you to look like yes, it is kind of a string, but the way how this data will be get stored in the backend database, I mean in the backend memory location, how it will be processed will be different. When I say bytes format, this data will be get stored in a numerical bytes numbered way, rather a string format in the backend memory location. That makes differ in terms of how we are handling this data. Especially the bytes format is more useful when we are working with a use case where we are transferring that data from one system to another system, or any API kind of interactions. We'll talk about these use cases in later lectures, right? And today our goal is to understand the primitive data types and examples. How do we store these primitive data type values to a variable in your program, and what is the snake case format in Python to have a very correct variable names, meaningful variable names are compassed. All right, we deep dive into these data types variables in further lectures, but for now, right, let me quickly execute this program. And when I execute this program, I wanted to print the values of these variables quickly to verify how it is being treated by my Python program. Anytime if you want to display any output for your program as an output, right, we need to use some built-in functions. Print is the built-in function in Python. Any function will have a function name and with a parenthesis like this, and within the parenthesis you need to pass the argument, the data that you wanted to process by this function. In this case, print is the function name in Python, and within the parenthesis you need to pass the data what you wanted to process. Let's say I wanted to print the phone number, right? And you see I'm just saying that hey, I wanted to print a phone number. Anything within the quote mark inside your print parenthesis will be printed as is, right? And after comma whatever you say, that is the variable name which is replaced or rendered by the corresponding value of it. Let me quickly execute this code, and we have a separate lecture on formatting the print statements to print these things in effective way later, but for now I just quickly wanted to run print just to show you that how the variables can be used later in the program space, right? And in order to execute this code quickly, I can just go to this IDE, right, select this current file and just click on this play button. Now you see that the program has successfully executed, and you can see that the phone number and the phone number, I mean phone underscore number is a variable that is now rendered with the corresponding value of it. That is how we can use this variable in the rest of the program for your specific use cases. So here the print is the standard keyword. What is keyword? Right? The print has its own meaning in Python. So these standard keywords you cannot use as an variables. Let's say if I wanted to have a variable name called print, and I wanted to keep some string here, it won't be accepted. You see that the ID is already flagged it as a warning with a yellow underscore here, which says that the print cannot be used as a variable. Any built-in keywords cannot be used as a variable because it has its own meaning in Python, right? So that is not accepted in Python. All right, now we know how to print the variables, how to use the variables in the program, right? And let's say when Python is going to deal with the data we will not get the data as how we are looking for all the times. In the sense, sometimes you may be looking for a string data, but you get the data in the integer format. Sometimes your requirement may need a integer data, but you may get it a string format, right? So then how do we deal with this type of the data that you have received in a different format, right? Sometimes, not always, sometimes it's possible to do the type casting. Is mean that if you have received the data in a integer format, but whereas it's supposed to be a string, yes, you can convert it into a string format and process it for your specific requirement. Same thing apply for other type of data as well, right? Converting the data types from one to most other will be a common task, right? Will be performing in any application development you as a Python developer, right? Let's see how do we do the typecasting, and first of all, how do we know that what type of data is being stored into these variables. Though I'm telling that this is a string data, this is a integer, a floating, boolean, bytes data, but I just wanted to confirm that what kind of the data that it is storing in every variable, right? So Python has a built-in function called type. The type function will take the variable name as an argument, and which will be returning the type of the data that this variable is holding. And I wanted to print that, right? So obviously we know that print is the function which will be printing whatever is being given within the parentheses. So here I'm just giving type of phone number as an input argument to the print function, so that the response of this type will be get printed for us. Let me execute this code. Now you see that the line number 8, the response is class str. We'll talk about this class in upcoming sessions when we are entering it into the object oriented programming concepts. But for now, if you notice this str, right, the str is referring that the phone underscore number is the variable which is currently storing the string type of data. For example, let me use this username here and let me execute this code. You see that the data that the username variable is stored is in bytes format. Same thing if I go for accepted variable and let me execute it, you see that it is a boolean type. So type is very much useful in Python to understand what type of data that you have received, and based on that you will get to know whether the typecasting is needed or you can use this data as is. For example, I have a number called 10. Let's say I'm expecting this number 10 as like an integer format, but for some reason you have received it as a string. You may be asking me a question that what does it mean by receive the data as an integer or a string, because you are actually creating these variables and assigning the data, right? But this is for testing. When it comes to the real time, right, you are not keeping the data as like a literal in this file itself like this. You receive the data from the external clients. When I say client, you have already seen the 3-tier architectural things, right? The client is making a request to the server by sending the payload, right? And that payload may have a data in a specific format. All right, then you may be receiving the data in a different format and you wanted to convert it. Correct. That time I can't go and tell to the client that, hey client, I need an integer, but why did you send a string? It's a business requirement. You got it in one type, and it's our responsibility as a Python developer to convert it into the nice formats, right? Let's say in this case, let me see what is the type of the data. My number is string, right? But I need it in a integer, correct? So I can do this. So int is the built-in function which we can use for typecasting to convert any other different data type it into the integer format. After the conversion, let's say I wanted to store this data, right? So my new number, let's say. Now I wanted to print this data, my new number, and also I wanted to show you what is the type of the data that I have now, correct? So print, I wanted to see the type of my new number, and let me execute this code. Now you see that the line number 12 is printed as 10. Yes, I have got the data as 10. And line number 14, if you see, right, it is printed as int, integer, right? That means I have received the 10 as like a string data, but as I wanted to use this data for mathematical purposes, I wanted it as like a integer, right? That's where I have used the int as like a typecasting function, right, to convert it, and the converted value I have assigned it back to my new variable, and this is the variable that I will be using throughout my rest of the program to use this number as like a integer, not like a string, right? So if we have assigned the value directly to the variable, that is called as a literal value. But in this case, if you see a line number 10, right, the right side is not a value directly, right? This is called as a specific expression, and that expression will be evaluated. The output of this expression will be assigned as a value to the new variable possible, right? So the way how I did a typecasting for my number, let's say I wanted to do the typecasting for phone number as well. This was just understanding. Let's say the phone number is in string format, right? But I wanted it to be like an integer, right? You can do that. Int of specify the variable name, so that this string data will now be converted into the integer. Now let's say I'm doing a little more changes. I have received the data, the phone number data as like an integer, but you know, right, the phone number is not for mathematical operations, and no, I wanted it to be a string, right? So what I can do, I can convert it into a string format. While I'm doing all these different exercises for testing, right, maybe some of these print statements I don't want it to be executed because I'm doing some testing, keep on changing the stuff, right? You can comment them. I just have selected the code which I don't want it to be executed, and if you are using the Mac system, use command / that will comment this entire code block. In Python, wherever you see the hash as in prefix or starting of this line, then that line is called as an commented, and that line will not be executed at all, right? Now let's say I have the phone number which is in integer format, and I wanted it to be like a string format, and you can use the typecasting function like this, str, and specify the variable that you wanted to convert it into a string format, and I wanted to see the type of this converted value, and I wanted to print the value of this type. It's possible, right? You see, first this innermost expression will be executed. The output of this innermost expression will be given to the type. The output of this type will be given to the print. That's how you can make everything in one single line as well, guys. Now if I execute this code, you see that the data is converted it into a string format, whereas it was in a integer format. Good. Now let's say I'm just doing one more simple exercise here, that I have the first name which is already in a a string format, right? I wanted to convert this first underscore name into a integer format, right? I wanted to use the integer as in typecasting, specify that, and now I wanted to get the type of this value. Then I wanted to print, right? Now let's try to execute this. You see that there is an exception in Python. If it is not able to handle any a syntax or anything that you have written, right, it will throw the exception like this. The errors are called as an exception in a programmatical language, right? And this exception will have the details like in which number the issue is there, and you see the exact placement where the problem, all this stuff. What it is complaining is you are trying to convert the string into a integer. That's great, but is it really the integer data? You see that the string has RAV. These are the alphabets, right? How do you convert the alphabets it into a numerical or integer format? It's not possible, right, technically. So that's where it is complaining. That means, yes, the str, int are great typecasting, but these will work only if the data is suitable for it to be converted into that specific format, or else no. In this case, RAV123 is a string data. No, you cannot convert it into a integer because some of the characters are not eligible for it to be a integer data that you can use for math related operations, right? Same thing applicable for all other typecasting, guys, believe me, right? And there are a few more typecasting. Let's say if you wanted to convert it into a floating, it will be a float, and we can use these typecasting wherever needed, right, as per the requirement. And so far we have discussed about the built-in functions or print, type, and some of the typecasting variables, data types, right, and literals. Pretty good. These concepts may look very simple, but they are forming a foundational level for you, and which are very important to deal with any data later in the advanced sessions, guys. Thank you for your time, and feel free to add your comments about this topic, and we'll be meeting you guys again in the next lecture with some more new advanced deep dive into these data types. Thank you.